What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp here, Fightful MMA podcast. It is October 19th. I am managing editor of Fightful.com. Make sure you all head over there. Check out tons of podcasts, interviews, photos, videos, forums, really anything you could think of across MMA, pro wrestling, and boxing. I'm joined today by one of those guys who gets a lot of those interviews, Mr. James Lynch. James, it's your first full week doing this like all the time. How you feeling?
Good. Busy. That's the one thing I was worried about is, maybe I wouldn't have a lot of stuff to do, but it has just been nonstop since Monday morning, getting lots of interviews, doing a lot of editing, and just having a lot of fun. That's the main thing. And so far, so good. That's all I can say.
You don't even have time to make your bed.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a mess in here, being a dad and everything. It's tough with the little one. So yeah, apologies for the bed, but the content here is going to be what people are going to be tuning into.
Hey, if my bed were in my background, people would see that I never have time. Even if I did have time to make my bed, it wouldn't be made.
Right.
So
yeah, no, I hear you. So
we have lots of stuff coming from James this week. A really great one that he has up on his YouTube with Colby Covington, which Fightful.com will have a couple of stories on. Just unbelievable stuff coming from James. But lots of news in the MMA world. It always happens like this. Joe and I do a show on Tuesdays. And the thing is, I originally pitched for it to be on Thursdays because it never fails. Like, as soon as we go off the air, a bunch of stuff happens. And, this week was definitely right up there with it. First off, I want to talk about this fight announcement. Michelle Waterson versus Tecia Torres. I think that's a great fight in that division.
Yeah, I love this matchup. Michelle Waterson, of course, now on the reality TV show, The Challenge as well. So she'll be coming off that and then doing this matchup here. But smart on the UFC. Waterson got a lot of exposure fighting Paige Van Zandt, who, is getting a big push herself. And then Tecia Torres as well. Some people thought maybe she'd be fighting for the title next, but this is the right matchup right now. Strawweight's still sort of looking for their next contender because after Rose, it's pretty slim pickings. And I think Torres is a great matchup. And we've seen Waterson, I know Waterson's coming off the loss to Nami Yunus, but again, a very game fighter, and fighting someone in Torres who's coming off an impressive win herself against Juliana Lima.
I remember when that season of The Ultimate Fighter happened, I was sitting there thinking, man, Tecia Torres, she's probably the one. She's probably going to win this. Didn't work out that way. And then she lost the fight to Rose Namajunas that really set her back. And until her last fight, she didn't do a whole lot that made you sit back and take notice of, oh, wow, this is a future one to watch in that division. And now she's 28 years old. She's still young, and she's only lost one fight. If she gets past Michelle Waterson, I think that I don't know that she's any real threat to Joanna, but if Rose somehow takes that fight, I would love to see that rematch. I would love to see Tecia take on Joanna as well, but I think she's a logical contender in that division if she were to gain that victory.
Yeah, and we often forget that on The Ultimate Fighter, she was, like you said, someone that I think a lot of people thought would potentially win the show, and she was upset by Randa Marcos. So now she's sort of getting her footing again and, going on a bit of this run. And I can't disagree here. I think the winner of this fight will be either having a title shot next or be right up there. But it's just great matchmaking on the UFC's part because, again, you've got someone in, Waterson who's, looked pretty good for the most part except for her last fight, and then Torres as well, quietly making a nice win streak and getting that statement win in her last fight.
And then Tecia Torres has gotten beaten by Carla Esparza too, which Carla Esparza in that she was also one of the favorites at that point and ended up winning it. But I'm really excited to see how these divisions look in about a year when 125 is really rocking, and who knows if 145 will even be around. But I'm really excited to see how 115, 25, and 35 look in that landscape.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see who will move up, who will move down. The divisions are going to look a lot different, like you said. And, if you look at the run that Joanna's been on as champion, there might be some fighters that were contenders that might think about going up just because of the fact it's going to take them that much longer to get back up, to earn another title shot. Someone that comes to mind is Claudia Gadelha, who, just lost her fight. She might be better served going to 125 at this point, just with the fact that she's had a couple of bids at Joanna. She's coming off that loss in her last fight to Andrade. I think, moved to 25 would be interesting. And you had her in that division. How much more interesting does that division look, right? So
yeah, exactly. A lot of
potential.
And Joanna has said that she wants to beat Rose Namajunas and then at least defend her title one more time. She wants to go after Ronda Rousey's women's defense record. So we know that a possible move to 125 isn't on the horizon for maybe a year before she decides to take that championship as well. And then you have Valentina Shevchenko saying that she wants to move to 125. Like, when she has a fair opportunity in a very murky 135-pound division to get a rematch, she's like, no, I think I'll try my hand at 125. So that's very interesting in my opinion.
Well, part of that might be the fact that she fought Joanna earlier in her career. Maybe, we almost saw it happen at 213, right? Joanna was going to step in for Amanda Nunes, and, they just couldn't get it cleared. But maybe that's the reasoning there, because how big of a fight would that be, a rematch between Joanna and Valentina? I mean, that's as good as it gets for women's MMA.
Do you have a certain pick? Have you watched much of this season of The Ultimate Fighter?
I have, but here's the thing. I always watch it a day later just because, like, usually on Wednesday nights or something, I'm usually busy doing other things like interviews or editing or whatever. So I usually miss it. So I'll probably watch it like tonight or tomorrow. I have been watching it pretty closely. And, it's tough to say, Barb Horncheck, has looked great, so far. I think she's still the favorite. But I'm not counting out. I really like Montana Stewart. She's someone that very young, has a lot of experience. They talked about that, with her heading in, and obviously a lot going into this show for her, and I think she could be the dark horse to potentially win the show, but I think Barb's still going to be my #1 pick to take home the title.
I'm going to binge watch all the fights, I think, in the week prior to Tough. That way it's kind of fresh in my mind. Yeah. I think it says a lot about Justin Gaethje and Eddie Alvarez and how they were focused on this. The two people who were lower seeded than their opponent that they picked both won their opening round fights. In Sijara Eubanks, who was seeded 12th compared to Maya Stevenson's 5, and Nico Montano over Lauren Murphy, and they both, Rachel Ostovich over Melinda Fabian, and they both won their fights. So I mean, that's pretty good. And Roxanne Modafferi has come out and said that she much prefers this season to the season that she was with Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate, because she said there's not as much bickering between the coaches. It's more about them than it is about the coaches. So, and it's I would have never thought a few years ago that not only would Roxanne Modafferi be a contender in this, but #1 seed.
Yeah, I know. Isn't it weird? I mean, she's really turned things around, and she's always been sort of like this, I don't want to say like America's sweetheart, but like people were really rooting for her, and to see her actually be able to turn things around, it's been sort of a nice secondary storyline in this season. And, I'm glad you mentioned the coaches. A lot of people going into this were like, yeah, it's great that Alvarez and Gaethje are fighting, but as coaches, as personalities, it's going to be kind of boring. But the great thing about it, Sean, that we've discovered is that the focus has been on the fighters this season. And I think that's really what it's all about. You have these good coaching rivalries, but oftentimes you forget about the fighters on the show. I mean, that Ronda and Miesha season, I mean, I don't even remember too much about the fighters. I know who was on there, but I always forget what the fights were, because there was so much about, Ronda and Edmund and, Dennis Hallman and, Miesha Tate and all that. So it's, I'm glad the focus is kind of being put back on the fighters this season.
I really remember the Duke Pennington fight, and that's it. That's all I remember from that season from an in-cage perspective. Roxanne Modafferi, she when she got beat out of the UFC, I was thinking she needs to hang it up. It's time to go. I thought, maybe UFC could hold on to her as maybe like a Japanese translator or something, because who wouldn't want to see her in the cage doing that? That would have fit her. She went to Syndicate. She straightened it up. She got with a real camp, and has just she's a person I look forward to watching fight now, and that just wasn't the case a few years ago. So hats off to her for making that transition and making that something that she wasn't going to be defined by. I think that's pretty cool.
I agree. And the fact that, she's been doing this a long time, and, often when she gets to a big stage like the Ultimate Fighter, her first go around, you think it's probably done. It's probably not going to happen. But I mean, she's 35 years old. She made her debut in 2003. I mean, the fact that she's been able to still, get better and better throughout his career is pretty remarkable. And again, a nice storyline that's sort of been added on this season.
Somebody who hasn't necessarily gotten better as their careers went on is Derrick Lewis. He had, I thought, one of the worst performances of 2017 in his last fight. He had to withdraw from his planned bout against Fabricio Verdum the day of with a back injury. Now Diamond Dallas Page is stepping up and offering kind of his services to Derrick Lewis. Diamond Dallas Page has helped wrestlers who had kind of fallen off in Jake the Snake Roberts, Scott Hall, Chris Jericho credits it as the reason, as the DDP's yoga program, as the reason he's able to be in the ring at 46, 47 years old. Do you think Derrick Lewis should take him up on this? He had went vegan. He got himself in much better shape, but it just wasn't enough.
Well, Sean, I'm actually a DDP yoga user, believe it or not. I'm very familiar with DDP yoga. Yeah, actually, I might even have, let me see. Oh, look at this. DDP yoga right here. I got the DDP.
Oh, nice.
So I wasn't even just saying this to, you know, suck up to your audience or whatever, but no, I use it, and I've been following I found the Diamond Dallas Page thing very inspirational as well. And to answer your question, absolutely. I think what Dallas has done with a lot of wrestlers, with a lot of people who have, you know, struggled to stay on track with a lot of discipline, I think that's really what they teach, is just sort of the nutrition and the discipline and all that. I think it would be great if Derrick can have an open mind to it. He seems like kind of a guy who might not be too privy to doing something like this, but by all means, if it's going to help him get in better shape and to really sort of hone in on the skills that he does have, we could see a turnaround in Derrick Lewis's career.
I've told this story before, but after, like, I trained pretty hard at MMA. I wanted to make a go of it, and I ended up with 2 bulging discs in my neck that pressed down the nerve that ran down my right arm. And there was a pretty long period where it wasn't comfortable to do anything. Like, I couldn't stand up straight. I couldn't feel my right arm. I did DDP yoga. It got me back on the mats. Like, I'll never be able to consistently because of all the injuries I've accrued, but it allowed me to do pro wrestling. It allowed me to do a lot of things. It allowed me to live comfortably. And I think for a guy like Derrick Lewis, who does seem like he's not always – did you see the video on Embedded of him, like, trying to talk his nutritionist?
Yes.
Into letting him eat at McDonald's? That was funny, but you can tell it reflected him.
Yeah, it's true. And, you know, we don't talk about this often, but, you know, food is an addiction. I mean, if you look at sort of, you know, especially like fast food and everything, like for some people, it's as tough to put down as it is, you know, for people who are, you know, tied on drugs. There's a chemical in there that, you know, makes you want to eat something good. And, you know, for these athletes, they got to eat, you know, as clean as they can to be in tip top shape. And if you're eating this stuff, it's going to really sort of, you know, deteriorate your body. So, you know, for someone like Lewis, I think the mindset isn't there yet. He needs someone to really step in and say, look, this is where your career's at. This is where your career could go if you just make a couple changes and you know, really sort of focus on things and, you know, work on the diet, work on the flexibility. Because we've seen a lot of fighters, you know, do the yoga thing and also, you know, go on the diet thing really hard. And we've seen a lot of success. I know George St. Pierre, for example, you know, he's doing a lot of the gymnastics and yoga and all that. And we've seen his flexibility sort of help him in his fight career. So maybe the same sort of thing could happen for Lewis.
I know Tito Ortiz used it for a little bit. Like, he's had a ton of neck issues. Like, when you get those neck issues and back issues, they don't generally go away. Like, you gotta, it's a maintenance thing. If you don't do your maintenance, they just come back and come back and come back.
Yeah, it's tough. I have a shoulder injury right now that I've been dealing with for about a year now, and probably going to need surgery next year. So I'm just kind of working around it. But it's so, you know, your body, you got to appreciate it, because if anything sort of happens, you know, it really does impact certain things. I can do most things that I want to do, but I am limited in certain areas as far as what I can do with my shoulder. So I feel for those who are suffering with injuries.
I want your take on this Chris Cyborg Holly Holm thing.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Chris Cyborg, I don't know who runs her social media in particular. You know, I saw Jeremy Botter saying it's the same guy who runs like Jake Shields and stuff, because they post the MMA imports links. But there's a possibility that I know they pay to have their links placed, and hey, that's a part of business. But I don't know if that's the person that runs everything. But whoever does it, like, is always, regardless of situation, painting Chris Cyborg as a victim.
Right.
Like, they would find a way to link to the Lena Landsberg fight and act like Chris Cyborg was victimized in that fight somehow. That's the unique skill of her social media person. And on her Twitter, whether it was her or that person, said that they wanted Holly Holm tested as often as she is. Holly Holm's been tested more. But what do you make of all this?
It's just a disaster. I mean, really, your social media person is supposed to help out your career, not hinder it. And that's all. I forget the guy's last name, but his first name's Ray. It's her boyfriend who's the one who's doing the social media posts. And yeah, and then, you know, poor Chris, she has to go and do a video after to explain what it is that her boyfriend meant. I mean, here's the thing, Sean. Chris Cyborg's picking a fight that she shouldn't be picking. You don't try and paint Holly Holm in this bad light with steroids, especially coming from someone who did test positive for steroids. Not necessarily twice. What happened. Yeah, twice, exactly. really, in Strikeforce, and then obviously what happened with her delayed, featherweight fight. But it's one of those things where I don't get, we want fighters to sort of build storylines and have, people buy into certain fights, but I don't think it's needed in this case. First off, Holly Holm defeated Ronda Rousey. That in itself, people know who Holly Holm is. You don't need to try and sell us on this fight. I think I've mentioned this to you before. Chris Cyborg and Holly Holm is probably the biggest fight you can make right now in women's MMA from a name value standpoint.
Yeah.
And why are you poking the bear? It just seems like the idea was to try and build up even more hype for it, but it's actually taken it about 5 or 6 steps back. And Chris Cyborg, again, just not looking great in the situation, and I believe it's the person, I believe it's this Ray character, her boyfriend, who's just making everything worse and should just sort of stay off the social media for now.
There are a couple situations where I think some of these fighters don't understand that what they're doing is hurting the promotion. Like Michael Bisping going out there saying GSP's on steroids all the time. I'm like, man, that's not a good look. Mm-hmm. That's a terrible, terrible look. I hate that that's what it always turns to. Like even Ferguson on Kevin Lee. I don't know Kevin Lee's history. I know he's never popped. I know Chris Cyborg has twice. And she got that retroactive TUE, which a little sketchy, a little odd.
Yeah.
But it seems like this stuff happens with her all the time. All the time. She's like, well, if they're testing me at 5 a.m., they should be testing you at 5 a.m.
It's the way it is. I mean, you've had Elias on your show talking about, them going through a fire escape to try and get him to get, tested and everything. So it's just the nature of the game. Playing the victim mentality is just not a good way to play this at all. I get that, there's other things to this, as far as Cyborg being a female fighter. I'm sure there's been some, just notoriously awful things said towards her in her direction. I get that. But let's not use that as an excuse to sort of exemplify her from, or to take her away from all these other things that have happened with, the sketchy test, this and that, the fact that she's popped, and the fact that, Sean, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but if you look at her from her first pro fight, which is available on YouTube, to how she looks now, she looks completely different. I mean,
yes.
It's not hard to kind of figure things out here. So I think she should just stay quiet and fight and let the, her fighting do the talking, so to speak, and not, create these sort of narratives that just don't need to be created.
No, I'm with you there. Alexander Gustafsson says he's willing to wait for a title shot. And one of this kind of goes into one of the questions that we had on Twitter, which you all can contact us at Lynch on Sports, at Fightful Online, or at Sean Ross Sapp. What's next for Daniel Cormier? Daniel Cormier seems to have booked his own fight. He says, I want to fight Volkan Ozdemir next. Gustafsson says he's willing to wait. What do you think of that?
I think it's a bad idea. I think in this day and age with Gustafsson, I mean, he's 30 years old. It's not like he's, spring chicken or anything like that. He's had a lot of fights. I think you got to stay active. I mean, it's rare. There's a few cases where waiting for a title shot has worked out. Tyron Woodley's a good example where, he didn't want to fight until he got the title shot and it worked out for him. But we've seen other cases where, fighters just haven't gotten fights booked. They've just been really inactive. I just think in this case, it's not a good idea, especially with how weak the light heavyweight division is. I mean, Gustafsson could literally fight anyone in that top 10 outside of some of the top guys, and he's probably going to win. So why not stay active and keep things going and utilize the fact that, you've got a couple wins here. And not only that, it makes a stronger case for a title shot because we're just 2 fights removed from him losing to Cormier, granted a split decision, but I think it's something that, some people still are saying, is this the fight to make? And, Ozdemir, like you said, gone on a bit of a run himself. So I think if Cormier is going to fight Ozdemir, get Gustafsson the winner of Serkinov and Teixeira. I know that Teixeira just fought Gustafsson, but if Serkinov wins, let's do that fight. I know there was rumblings of that fight supposedly taking place earlier this year before Serkinov had those contract issues. So that's the fight to make next, in my opinion. Gustafsson shouldn't hold out.
I think it's a bad look for Gustafsson because he got a title shot after he withdrew from a fight. Mm-hmm. That happens. Then he got another title shot after he lost a fight. Not just lost a fight in 2 minutes. So you're telling me, I mean, at least he's coming off of 2 wins, but you're telling me now you're going to wait? I think that's rough. You should get back in there and fight.
Yeah. No, you got to stay active. And like I said, the division is so weak. Like if we're talking welterweight, maybe, it's one of those divisions that's a little bit deeper. I think then you maybe risk the loss. But I think Gustafsson beats most of the guys on this roster, and I think he's got to stay active and be relevant. That's the other thing. Fans, we everything's based off wins and losses, and then how you did in your last fight. Fans sort of forget about Gustafsson at this point because he's been very he hasn't fought much in the last couple of years. So I think that's one thing to sort of put in consideration as well, is that if you stay active, you're going to be in the minds of the UFC and everyone else. So it's just something to put into perspective.
Looks like Khabib Nurmagomedov is trying to get himself in the mind of fans right now. He's been on a bit of a media frenzy of late. He says that Tony Ferguson is the real champion.
Yeah.
But says he wants to fight a bit of everybody. Then Edson Barboza comes out and says, I've agreed to fight Khabib. Personally, I think that's an awesome fight, given what we saw in Khabib's over the past year from Khabib, is that maybe he runs into some trouble with striking. And I think Edson Barboza is the guy to test that. That being said, there's a good chance he could ragdoll Edson Barboza. I think it's just a really good matchup fight. To me, I don't want to see Khabib in a championship build fight until he shows that he can make 155 pounds safely again.
I agree.
Because he's ran into that trouble over and over again. What do you think of Barboza Khabib and the potential on the horizon in this division?
I think it makes perfect sense. This is definitely the fight to make. People were saying that Barboza should have got the matchup against Ferguson for the interim title. People are crying about that, saying Kevin Lee didn't deserve it. Of course, if that fight would have happened, I don't think people cared nearly as much as they did with the Kevin Lee fight, because Kevin Lee, sells the fight in itself. Mm-hmm. But that's a topic for another day. This fight, yeah, and again, Khabib's undefeated, so he should get a top-tier opponent. I think Barboza is the guy to really bring it to him. And you mentioned the striking. I think it, poses an interesting challenge for Khabib. And then, also, I don't think Khabib, like you said, should get a championship fight. I mean, he missed weight on his own accord. There's no excuse for that. And I think that he should, as a sort of a form of punishment, should not get a title shot or anything like that. I think it is sort of, just another tough matchup, and you sort of go from there. But that's the fight to make. There's no one else in that division that really, I think, Khabib should fight at this point. I think it's, the winner of, that fight between Barboza and Khabib then would hopefully fight the winner of Ferguson and McGregor. But yeah, we all know that might not happen.
So my thing with Khabib is, like, he pulled out of that fight, and then he's like, well, we got to wait until at least the fall because of Ramadan. Okay. Yeah. Then they say, okay, how about MSG or whatever it is they offer him? No, can't do that.
Yeah, you can't be making these demands when you pull out of a fight. I mean, that's just, and the Ramadan thing, Bilal Muhammad, I don't know if you've known, he's fought his last couple camps, his last couple fights during Ramadan. So if he can do it, why can't Khabib? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, a lot of guys in MMA employ intermittent fasting as is.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it's not an unheard of thing to kind of go about it that way. I have real concerns about him making 155. So I wouldn't be surprised if he moved up. But now if they made that 165 division, look out for him. But I want to see him make weight. I want to see him face an Edson Barboza. And when you've pulled out and you've rejected title fights, you don't have the room to say, give me one. Give me one. I know.
Yeah.
You passed on it.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, if you miss weight, if you pull out of a fight, I mean, that's not the time to start making demands after, something like that happens. And, a lot of times when Khabib tweets, I'm not sure it's him. It might be his manager, doing sort of that strategy of, trying to get, because I think we had RDA, this week say that he wanted an interim title fight. I think that was more his manager trying to create some buzz as well. Same manager, I might like to add. So, I mean, these are things we have to take into consideration. But yeah, Khabib should not be demanding anything at this point. He should be lucky he's even getting a fight with Barboza, because the cardinal sin in MMA is, missing weight and pulling out of a fight, especially a fight that was as big as that with Tony Ferguson.
Speaking of that lightweight division, we have Paul Felder, who's won 4 of his last 5, booked against Al Iaquinta. On any given week, you don't know if Al Iaquinta is ever going to fight again. It's just the unfortunate way it is. But he is a great fighter. That's going to be on UFC 218 in Detroit. It's good to see this division moving a little bit, because like I said on previous shows, it came to a standstill during that year that Conor McGregor was gone. Not just him. Nobody was fighting. And when they did fight, you had fights go to like no contests and draws and stuff like that. So we're finally getting the wheels moving.
Yeah, they need new contenders. We talked about this last time, and this is exactly the type of fight you need to do. You know, Felder gaining a lot of notoriety now with his commentary work, so he's sort of, you know, becoming this fan favorite, and of course his fight style as well is very fan appealing. So, you know, he wins this fight. That's going to be a big win for him. Iaquinta, you know, he's kind of the anti-UFC guy. You know, he talks about how much he doesn't like his pay, but then he takes these fights. So he's sort of like this renegade, like underground sort of guy that everyone likes as well, and he does the realty thing as well. So that's kind of a side story as well. But yeah, they need to create new contenders. With Alvarez and Gaethje on The Ultimate Fighter, things are at a standstill there. You've got Pettis and Poirier coming up, which I guess will sort of bring another contender as well. But it's sort of gone through a bit of an influx. Some of the guys that you would see a couple of years ago just aren't in that division. Guys have moved down. Guys have moved up. It's not what it used to be. And now we need to create these new contenders. So after this McGregor thing gets sorted out, if it does get sorted out, you need guys waiting in the wings. And these type of fights will certainly lead to that.
Vitor Belfort announced on Instagram that he will be facing Uriah Hall in January. Now, as people of this show and website will know, Nikita Krylov fan sent me a text this morning, and he said this is either going to be the most exciting fight of all time or a 3-round staring contest.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen in this one. Hall coming off, you know, one of the best comeback victories this year, maybe not, you know, maybe of all time as well. Just the win over Jocko. So he's sort of getting back, you know, in the swing of things. And Belfort, he won a fight against Nate Marquardt that I don't think he won. I think a lot of people felt like he didn't win. So he has a bit to prove. But the hope here is that if you look at this on paper and you look at some of their past performances, this should produce a knockout, should produce a highlight reel knockout. But at the same time, Uriah Hall had some pretty boring fights as well. Belfort, you know, the last fight against Marquardt, not a great fight, and one that like I said, I don't think he won. So the hope is that we see an early finish, but there is that possibility of it going the distance and being a bit of a snoozer. But either way, a fight for both fighters to kind of reinvent themselves. You know, Hall getting the win was nice, but he's a guy who had a lot of hype, and he's really just been very disappointing to say the least in his career. So he needs this sort of signature win on his resume. And for Belfort, it's about staying relevant. And if he beats Uriah Hall, he's certainly going to be somewhat relevant in that division.
I still believe that Uriah Hall can put the lights out of like 98% of that division when he pulls the trigger. It's just a matter of pulling the trigger. And I've never seen, well, Anderson Silva is perhaps as much of a case of that as he is, because we always saw what Anderson Silva was capable of when he did it, but he started to rely on that counter style. With Uriah Hall, he just straight up said he's scared when he goes into the cage. He's almost fearful, but whenever he just flips the switch, lights go out. Yeah, or on, to use that pun. But he doesn't win. Like, he hasn't been winning decisions in like the last 3.5 years. Like, he's been knocking people out or getting knocked out, and then Robert Whittaker took him to school. But
if you look at that Whittaker fight as well, that was a case where Whittaker was the aggressor, and I think that took Hall out of his game. And we've seen that a couple times where, you know, you look at the John Howard fight, for example, when he fought Hall, a fight that Howard shouldn't have won, and Hall, you know, very disappointing in that one. But that's one where Howard got in his face and really sort of neutralized the weapons of Hall. So, you know, it is a confidence thing. It's also, you know, about sort of setting the pace as well. And I think Hall should be able to. I mean, if we're picking a winner right here, right now, I think Hall should win by knockout if he's, you know, able to sort of get out of his own way. But part of it too is he's sort of the victim of his own success. You know, Dana White hyped him up so much on The Ultimate Fighter after that highlight reel win over Adam Sicilia, and now it's just you know, he just hasn't lived up to the, you know, next Anderson Silva or whatever it is they called him hype. So it's one of those things. I think if he didn't have that, maybe he's a different fighter. But I think part of it too is just the style matchups, and this is one that should favor him in my opinion.
I look at his career arc, and after that Musashi win, had he done the things like he should have beaten Gastelum, he should have beaten John Howard, he should have beaten Natal. Yeah, he should have won those 3 fights. And had he won those, coming off of a win over Gegard Musashi, he probably should have gotten a title shot off of that, because that would have been like 7 or 8 wins in a row, which by then he would have probably been facing talent of Musashi's level prior. He would have been fighting Natal and Ron Stallings and guys like that. But it's just weird, man. Like, I know that if you put him in there with Chris Weidman, I don't know that Chris Weidman doesn't get knocked out. It just depends on any certain day. Also, you know, I don't know that Chris Weidman doesn't drag Uriah Hall to the ground and pummel his face. I don't know that Weidman doesn't turn out Uriah Hall's lights. Also, I don't know that Uriah Hall stands on the outside and stares at him for 15 minutes. Like that's Uriah Hall.
Well, you mentioned the mental thing. I think that's definitely something that plays into a lot of his fights. I mean, we even saw with the media. Do you remember last year, Mike Bond from Junkie did an interview with Hall, and he was just really short with him, and it just was kind of a bizarre interview. And, you know, I get that fighters don't want to do interviews. I mean, you and I have interviewed, you know, numerous fighters, and sometimes you're not going to get, you know, the Steve Cazzolas every single time, but you're gonna have guys, like, to me, it just seemed like something's off, and to me that says that, you know, your mind's not maybe right going into a fight like that. So I think if he can get that figured out, because we've seen this. I mean, using a Canadian example here, David Loiseau. Everyone for years was raving about how great David Loiseau was in the gym, and he had some success in the UFC, got a title shot against Rich Franklin, but there were times when there were fights he should have won and he didn't because his head was getting in his own way, and it kind of looks like a similar situation here to Hall, where there's fights he should win, but again, just mentally he's not there, and hopefully he figures that out, because I think he is talented. It's just a matter of putting it all together.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. Ronda Rousey. So it looks like she's heading to the pro wrestling end of things. Tyron Woodley thinks that she would come back and fight Gina Carano. I think probably if she got that fight, if they could make it happen, she would. Gina Carano's been out of the cage for going on like 8 or 9 years now. Do you think Ronda Rousey would come back? And what do you think the possibility of UFC putting this together are?
I think the UFC would put this together very much so with the name value alone, and I think they're sort of taking notes here and there of what Bellator has been doing with some of their matchups. And this,
sorry to cut you off, but Dana White did say in a recent interview that he would put together Steven Seagal versus George Foreman too. So,
that's true. That's true.
I'm sure he would.
Yeah, no, of course. And I mean, we've seen the entertainment, value of this. I mean, it's the same reason why Paige Van Zandt and Sage North get pushed over other fighters. There is that entertainment value that's sort of added to the way fights are getting matched up. Yeah, absolutely. And does Ronda take it? I mean, if the price is right, I think, I've always sort of said this. I know I don't know Ronda that well, but I do know that as someone who's an Olympic athlete and someone who's, been competitive her whole career, I'm sure she doesn't like the way her career has sort of gone with those last 2 fights in the UFC. And, I know she hasn't officially retired, even though it kind of looks that way. But I think if she could fight Gina Carano, especially with the fact that if we're looking at this on paper, Ronda should be better, credentials wise. I don't think she'd be, she'd have the size disadvantage going into that one. But yeah, she might come back for that one. If I had to put money on it, I'd probably say it would happen.
We have a couple of events this weekend. Bellator 185, which got hit hard. Mm-hmm. This was an awesome-looking card. It was set to have Musashi Shlemenko on top, which is still there, supported by the Heather Hardy and Neiman Gracie fights, but it lost Phil Davis and King Mo. Who was fighting?
No, it was McGeary and King Mo.
McGeary and King Mo, and then
Rickles and Brennan Ward.
Rickles and Brennan Ward, and that losing Rickles and Brennan Ward was really just the dagger, just the knife. Because when I looked at that 5-fight card, and I was like, man, that's a good, solid show. And I thought that was going to set the tone for almost the fall season. Man, it lost a lot. I'm still going to watch it, but I'm probably not tuning into that card until an hour and a half before it ends.
Same here. I never miss a Gegard Mousasi fight. For those who know me, it's one of my favorite fighters. And so it's, to see him make his debut is just something I'm not going to miss. But yeah, it's unfortunate because, unlike the UFC, Bellator, it seems like a lot of the cards are focused like for certain markets. Like we're seeing the Pittsburgh card coming up. They're loading, that's at Penn State. They're loading that up with, a lot of, NCAA wrestlers. So it seems like for cards like this, like they can't, like where the UFC, like if they have an injury, unless it's overseas, I guess they'd go with like a local guy. But in a lot of cases, they can afford to fly someone out and make it happen. But in Bellator's case, they don't really have that luxury. It doesn't seem. It seems like they're sort of set in their ways. So yeah, this is what we're getting, and it's also a result of them sort of stacking certain cards, like the New York card. I think they were feeling the effects of that for months after, and they just don't have people readily available to come in and fill those slots, especially like a fresh matchup. Like an injury is one thing, but a fresh matchup is kind of tough. So it's unfortunate, but you know what? I'm still the fight of the weekend. We actually had a question. I got to quickly bring this up because it ties into this. Nick Baldwin asked, what is the biggest fight this weekend? For me, it is Mousasi and Shlemenko, just because Mousasi needs to win this fight. He needs to be the star that Bellator needs him to be, and that is more intriguing than, as much as I love Cerrone and Till, it's a bigger fight in my opinion. Yeah, I love the Musashi Shlemenko fight, and what I wonder is, Musashi's a big 185er. Yeah, he fought at 205. He was he fought at heavyweight. He did, and succeeded. Yeah.
I think there was at one point, like, God, I would have to go back and look, but
it was Dream. He fought in the heavyweight tournament. Like Sokoji
yeah,
was in that, and there's a bunch of guys.
but he was like something. It was something ridiculous. Like he was 12-1 or 13-1 above middleweight for a long time. Like, and we saw the absolute ease that Tito Ortiz at that stage of his career had facing Shlemenko with that size advantage. And I think Musashi right now at 32 years old, like prime, in my opinion, like just good to go. I think that he is going to put on a show against Shlemenko, but Shlemenko is a great first challenge, is a great first opponent, a former champion that they can put him in there with. And it's like I said with Joe, if I were Bellator and like somehow Shlemenko scores the upset, I'm doing a video package on all these guys that my homegrown Bellator guys have beaten up that have come over since all these UFC free. I'd put them together like the old WCW. This is where the big boys play, where they would show like Sting beating the shit out of British Bulldog or something when he was there. And it's like, man, see, there are great fighters here. There are world-class fighters here. I would absolutely run with that, but I am excited to see Heather Hardy, and I'm excited for this main event, and I will watch Neiman Gracie.
Yeah, Neiman Gracie's a bit intriguing as well, just with the fact, he's got the undefeated record, he's got the Gracie last name. So there are a few like intriguing things, but yeah, a lot of luster lost. And, I think the card there that's really going to sort of pick things up is the one after this, the 186 card. So.
Yeah. Oh, I like that card too. That's a good looking card right now. Well, I mean, it looks good.
Yeah.
As it plays out, maybe it won't be. It depends. But I've liked the way that like the Ed Roos and the Tyrell Fortunes and guys like that they've signed, and Aaron Pico with like no MMA experience show up and finish dudes. And I'm like, what? Like this is pretty awesome. But that show has Zach Freeman versus Syed Awad.
Great fight.
Brilliant matchmaking. Brilliant matchmaking to take a guy who was somewhat experienced in Freeman, who scored a win, which, when I saw them book Aaron Pico against him, I was like, that's ill-advised. Why would you, like, he's way too experienced. But Syed Awad's a guy who's been around in Bellator forever, and you can put Zach in there with, and it's not too much, but it's not too little.
And has a similar story too, because Awad, if you remember, knocked out Will Brooks, and Will Brooks was the the hot prospect at the time. So they're kind of in some ways, I know Awad's had a bunch of fights since then, but it's kind of an interesting matchup from that perspective.
You have the women's flyweight title fight. You have the light heavyweight title fight, Bader versus Vassell. Phil Davis is on the card. Ed Ruth is on the card. I'm really looking forward to that one. That's not going to be one that I tune into 80, 90 minutes before it ends, but hopefully also Logan Storley. That's
Taiwan Claxton as well from whatever it's, I think they're called Hard Knock now, or Hard Rock or something, the Combat Club team. He's making his debut, or he's got like a second fight or something. There's a lot of prospects on here that I hope Bellator does this more often, where they showcase these, because Logan Storley, from what I hear and what I've seen as well, is just the real deal. And I really hope that Bellator utilizes that, because Storley could have signed with the UFC and he chose to go with Bellator. So that says something, in my opinion. There's
this UFC show. It's a afternoon show. I'm so stoked that it's going to be happening early. But like, it's like when I look at the names, I'm like, man, that'd be a pretty decent fight night show. Like Artem Lobov, like his fight's going to be exciting against Feely. Sam Alvey, Marcin Held, who's fighting for his job pretty much. You have a heavyweight fight on there. Aspen Ladd, Jan Blachowicz, and then Carolina, Darren Till versus Donald Cerrone. But there's no buzz for this show, but I think in execution, this could be like, you could have a lot of finishes, have a lot of exciting fights on this show.
Yeah, and again, these cards are mainly just to showcase the talent that the UFC has sort of overseas and give sort of a glimpse of what the future can look like. I don't have an issue with cards like this, because to me, it's just if you're from there, it's a big deal, because you get to see sort of some of the the European talent, and so usually those are the cards that end up being pretty good. It's the ones that maybe look good on paper that sometimes don't produce those results that you want. So really, the fact that there is low expectations probably means that something good's going to happen out of this card.
Really looking forward to the Ladd versus Landsberg fight. I think that's a good one. Sam Alvey, who you spoke to for Fightful.com, taking that fight on short notice. And the real question, like what I'm looking for tomorrow, is does he make weight, and how does he look making weight? Because He didn't mince words. He said this is going to be a very tough weight cut. He told you that pretty bluntly.
Candidly. Yeah, I didn't even have to ask him. He was just kind of like, yeah, well, I did ask him about the weight, but he was kind of like, it's going to be a tough weight cut. And that's what happens, with short notice fights like this. And again, I think it's just a reminder to a lot of these fighters, if you want to stay active, you got to keep the diet, good year round, because if you don't, you're going to run into situations like this. And I hope Sam makes it, because right now, weight cutting, big topic right now, a lot of people trying to come up with solutions. And I just think that if he doesn't make it, it's just going to, we've had too many fights this year been canceled or catch weight fights just because of the fact that, a lot of fighters just haven't been able to make the limits. So hopefully this works out, but I'll be keeping an eye on that for sure.
And while I said this doesn't have a ton of buzz, it does have some storylines to it, like especially a couple of guys that I think could be fighting for their jobs. Marcin Held, Warlley Alves. And these are two guys, just really big, promising prospects as recently as, a year and a half ago. Warlley Alves won the Ultimate Fighter Brazil 3. Then he ran into the train derailer himself, Brian Barberena, who just doesn't care about any promotional. He's just there to beat guys. This is a guy who beat Colby Covington, choked him out in 90 seconds.
That's right.
And like I said, ran into Barberena, ran into Kamaru Usman. I think he will have a little bit of a longer leash than others. He's still 26. I think UFC knows that. So he'll be facing his third straight loss if he does end up losing in short notice fashion. But that couldn't look good if he did lose to an opponent that was given like a week and a half to prepare.
Yeah, no, these fights are important. I mean, the UFC sets these fights up for certain reasons. They want to get guys to show that they really belong here, and you really got to persevere and come through. So hopefully, he gets back in the win column on this fight, because it would be unfortunate.
Andre Fili versus Artem Lobov. That's going to be fun.
Love that fight. Love that fight. Yeah. What a great matchmaking there. Fili coming off the loss to Calvin Kattar. A lot of people thought he was going to beat Kattar. Kattar came out and said, no, I'm going to beat you. And Lobov, of course, the most popular guy just for the fact that he's McGregor's teammate. I mean, it's amazing. Anytime anyone mentions Artem Lobov, you just look at the hits on YouTube. It's insane how many people love this guy. And he had a good fight with Cub Swanson. I mean, Lobov always brings it. I think this is one of those fights where both guys have a lot to prove. People saying, Lobov, the reason his record's like this is because he'll fight anyone at any time. And well, if that's the case, you got a fighter in Fili who's had sort of an up and down career. Prove it. If you beat an Andre Fili, you belong in that division. And if you don't, then maybe we got to question some things.
Andre Fili's the type of guy I don't see losing like 3 fights in a row. He'll always find a way to sneak a win in there. Jan Blachowicz did, and that's pretty much kept him afloat, but he's lost 4 of his last 5, and he's facing Devin Clark. That is a tall task, because Devin Clark has looked real good since moving back up to light heavyweight. He won the RFA light heavyweight title, then debuted in the UFC at middleweight, decided to go back and has beat Stansberry and Collier, and now could really put his stamp on this division by winning.
Yeah, and another thing, too, about that debut that Clark had, that was in Sioux Falls, which is where he's from originally. So making your debut in your home state, it can be a lot of pressure. So I don't know if that played into it as well. But, Clark is now been training, full-time. I think leading into his debut, he only had a couple weeks out there, but now he's training full-time at Jackson Winklejohn. And obviously the benefits of that have been showing in his last couple fights, getting 2 back-to-back decisions. And Blachowicz, I mean, this is a fight that really, the UFC needs contenders at 205. So Clark, should win this fight, and if he does, this is one of those fights where, hey, he took out a savvy veteran. And Blachowicz, just disappointing is the best way to describe it. That fight with Pat Cummins in Buffalo, I was there live. Not a great performance for him. So he's really got to pick things up. But you'd think that Clark would be the one to hopefully turn things around and really give a glimmer of hope in that 205 division.
Karolina Kowalkiewicz, she should. She's trying to keep herself relevant in this division. Back-to-back losses to Gedalia and Joanna. How do you think she looks this weekend?
I think she looks great. It's no secret what the UFC is doing here. Karolina from Poland herself, fans love her. She just has sort of that endearing personality, and she's taken on Jody Escobar, who is, on the Ultimate Fighter, but, is just 2 fights removed, or a fight or 2 removed from the loss to Alexa Grasso. So it's not like Escobar is really someone that's going to pose like a really great threat to her. So I think, if you look at this matchup, Karolina should win this. The betting odds, if I just quickly take a look, I think Karolina was like a 4-1 favorite or something like that. If we're looking at it now, she's minus 470. So, the UFC knows what they're doing here. Jody will probably have good showing in her debut, but not enough to get it done. And Carolina will, bounce back from her pretty surprising loss to Claudia Gadelha. Not to take anything away from Gadelha, but I don't think people expected a first-round submission loss in that one for Carolina. So she really needs to sort of build herself back up, losing 2 fights in a row.
I have a real problem with one of the bookings on this show.
Let's hear it.
Anthony Hamilton.
Yeah, he retired, right?
He not only that, the guy is 3-6 in the UFC.
37 years old.
37 years old. He fought September 16th, where he was finished in 24 seconds. He was KO'd in February. He was submitted in 2.5 or less than 2 minutes in December. And then he retired last month. And 3 weeks later, he's like, psych, I'm fighting. Well, 3-6, you probably shouldn't be in the UFC anyway. If you're 3-6 in the UFC. I got a real problem with the UFC booking this fight. I think that's a bad move altogether, especially a heavyweight where I mean, come on, we know the score. Good chance he gets knocked out in 20 seconds.
It's true. Yeah, he's been finished in his last 3 fights, all in the first round. Granted, that's usually how heavyweight MMA goes. They don't usually go to a decision. But no, I agree. What's the gain here? Are they really trying to pump up this Adam? I'm not even gonna say his last name. Adam. Forget it. The Polish guy, basically.
I'll tell people after the fight happens on Saturday.
Yes, exactly. See how it's pronounced. But no, I don't see the gain in this. Like, what are they trying to do here? Is he trying to fight out his contract? What's the reason for this? It's just a guy losing 3 straight like this. Should be out of the UFC, especially in heavyweight, where they could bring in some new blood. There's prospects on the come up that could use their shot. So I don't know the thinking here. Is it that he's from Jackson Wink and maybe they want to throw him a bone here? I don't know, because they seem to like the bigger camps. But I don't know. I don't like this fight at all. And I'm with you there.
Rough booking. We got Donald Cerrone and Darren Till. Now, Darren Till doesn't have much of a name about him, but he's talking a big game. Mm-hmm. And we've seen him run into some speed bumps here and there during his UFC run. Donald Cerrone is tough to put away, but not impossible to put away, as we found out. How do you think this fight plays out?
Cerrone wins this. This is one of those fights where they're kind of just getting Cerrone back on the winning track. Cerrone's never lost 3 fights in a row before. He's lost 2 straight heading into this one. So it's interesting that this is one of those situations. It kind of reminds me a bit of when they booked. I'm going to go way back here when they booked Condit and Rory McDonald, and I'll tell you why. Because at that time, Condit was kind of he came in. I think he had a loss here and there, and then Rory's sort of the up and comer. With Till, if you look at the UK, if you look at sort of the European scene, they really haven't had one of those, big UK stars, not since like Bisping or Dan Hardy or anyone like that. So I think what they're trying to do here is Cerrone, he has lost a step. I mean, he's lost a couple fights here and there. He's had opportunities that he hasn't, been able to capitalize on. He needs a win. And I think a fight like Till, I don't think Till's ready for this fight, but I think it's one of those fights where he'll look good. People will be like, oh, that was a war. We're going to remember that fight. He'll probably lose, but he'll do enough where he'll become sort of a fan favorite and someone that people will want to tune in next time. But I think Cerrone wins. Just the experience factor alone. You look at the resume of who these guys have fought. I mean, Cerrone's fought the who's who, title challengers, former champions. Till's coming off a win over Bojan Velikovic, who love the guy, great interview, but not a great UFC fighter. Let's be honest here. Guys, also holding on to his job, and that's the fight that's going to get you to this, fight with Cerrone. I don't think so. It's to me, this looks like the UFC's trying to build someone as a big star in the UK, and that's why they've done this matchup. And I think Cerrone wins this probably by decision, but it'll be one of those back and forth fights where we'll get some moments, but at the end of the day, Cerrone will get his hand raised.
I worry that if Cerrone loses this, that he'll go down that Matt Brown path where it's just like 5 or 6 straight losses, and he's got the ability, but it's hard for him to unlock it type of thing. And Darren Till, if he won, worse things could happen than them having a guy to maybe build around in that regard, because he is willing to talk it. But man, sometimes when he says these things, I get the feeling he's trying to convince himself instead of us. Mm-hmm. Like that he's there and that he's ready, because like I'll hear him talk about how hard he hits. And I'm like, man, you haven't finished your last 2 guys, and those are the type of guys that you would have finished if you hit that hard. Now, I'm sure if he hit me, I would think that he hit pretty damn hard, but that remains, that's not the point. Donald Cerrone is a guy that UFC, I think, wants to wants to succeed. He's getting up there. He's 34, but he said he wants to fight like 10 more times. So
yeah. Yeah, I
think it's possible.
Yeah, I was going to say that, I think the UFC just has a hard time marketing anyone outside. They have a hard time marketing fighters in general. I think we've seen in a lot of cases that the biggest stars are the ones who are self-promoters, and this is their way of sort of, giving Till an opportunity here. If Till wins, it's good for the UFC as well, because this guy just beat Cowboy Cerrone, and now, the next, card they have, overseas, they're going to book him there. It's kind of like what they're doing with Marcin Tybura. He had a fight against Mark Hunt. That was a fight for him where, if he beats Mark Hunt, then he's this next big thing. So it's sort of the same sort of booking here, I think, in terms of hoping that Till pans out. And if Cerrone wins, then, hey, he's back on track and we can start booking some fun fights for him. But I'm not ready to write off Cerrone just yet, because you look at his last couple opponents, Robbie Lawler, Masvidal, Matt Brown's always tough, Rick Story. He finished Cote, which I think was the first guy to do that in that division. So, I mean, for me, I think Cerrone is just, going to be too experienced in this one. But you never know. Anything can happen in MMA, as we've seen.
When you talk about how they don't market in the UK, a lot of times I think they go with the hot hand, and right now it's in America, like Stipe, Daniel Cormier, Woodley, Holloway, Garbrandt, but they do have Bisping and Conor that they can kind of just open that up to, and hopefully they do. I want to see MMA. I mean, a few years ago, it seemed like they were running Brazil every month. Like it seemed
true.
like, and as we've talked about before, Canada. What is there anything else you're looking forward to out of this weekend in MMA?
Just those two cards, really. I think a lot of us are sort of, I know, it hasn't gotten too much hype, but I think, to be honest, the Bisping GSP thing is just sort of slowly taking over the narrative. And, I was at the press conference last week. It was really cool to, I know some people didn't like it, but, Bisping selling the fight and St. Pierre's just kind of taking it. And I like that. I wasn't a fan of this matchup. I will watch it, obviously, but I think that's slowly sort of taking things over, and you forget how stacked that card is. And I think that's sort of what people are looking forward to, because next week's card is Machida and Brunson, which I've heard nothing about. So I think all the focus is on November 4th at this point. But some fun fights this weekend. But for me, it's all about Gegard Mousasi. That's what I'll be tuning in for.
Let the people know where they can follow you on social media before we go.
Lynch on Sports. You can find I post everything that I have on my social media. So that's the best place to get a hold of me. And Fightful.com, check out all my interviews. I'll be doing some more this week and this weekend, and just keeping that going. So far, so good. And I've been getting some really fun ones. The Covington one, highly recommend you guys check that out when the articles are up, because there's a lot of good stuff there. Covington talking about, his love for wrestling, him actually, working a bit in Impact, and also just his thoughts on the welterweight division in general. And he's got a big fight against Maia, and if he wins, another guy that the UFC can kind of look to and say, hey, this is a guy we can put on a big card and give him a big opportunity. So keep your eye out for that.
Follow me at Sean Ross Sapp. Follow us at Fightful MMA, Fightful Wrestle, and Fightful Online. We have individualized MMA, boxing, pro wrestling sections. If you don't like one or the other, you can bookmark which ones you want. Also, we have a filter on the main page that divides the stories up if you so choose. Forums, photos, videos, podcasts, anything you could ask for in a combat sports site, we have it at Fightful.com. Check it out, you guys. Until next time, we're out.